Hey YouTubers, this is the GSTV reviewer coming at you with another video for you guys today. So I want to come up on here and just give out my thoughts regarding about the recent announcement of Arrow's 8th season. And I say that because recently with the announcement, according to Stephen Amell, as well as many legit news outlets, that Arrow's 8th season will be the final season of the series as a whole. So I know I'm a little late on this recent breaking news or not so breaking news, but just want to kind of come up on here and just give out my thoughts concerning about my reaction as well as my stance regarding about the direction that Arrow has taken in recent years. It's really hard to believe we're almost at the end of this very decade, and Arrow premiered in October of 2012. And during the course of the 7 seasons, we've seen a lot of characters coming and going, or characters getting killed off, or characters leaving the series. With the recent announcement that Arrow will continue into season 8, and as well as turning out to be the final season of the entire show as a whole. So, Arrow, when the show came on, this was at a time when, the CW was really trying to kind of transition, because the CW, when it started off, was basically a carryover from the WB, basically a continuation of some of the content that made the WB very successful with their young adult dramas, especially some of the high school teen dramas as well. And you also have a couple like action adventure shows. Before that, you had Smallville, which was at that point their longest running show to air on that channel, from 2001 to 2011. We kind of got to a point in the 2011-2012 season where the CW lacked superhero shows. You had stuff like the Vampire Diaries and a couple other shows. You had the La Femme Nikita reboot, which I completely forgot about. And then you also have a couple like other dramas like what was it, the Canary Diaries, which was like a short-lived series that I think ran for like 2 seasons. One Tree Hill, which was kind of on its last legs. The 90210 revival that was airing. So they were airing like a lot of those kind of straightforward teen dramas that they were airing. CW is still cranking up some of that content today, just not as much as they used to back in like the early days of the CW, like stuff like Gossip Girl, which was also another popular young adult drama that had been airing throughout the early years of the CW network. When Arrow came around, it really kind of basically laid the groundwork, as well as slowly changing sort of like the landscape of the network. Because now a lot of the shows are kind of dominated by a lot of some of those said action adventure shows that dominated most of like the Monday to Friday primetime slot. And granted, we had a couple other non-action based shows like Jane the Virgin and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, etc., etc., etc. Arrow kind of paved the way for a lot of the other sister shows that would eventually premiere as the years that went on. Because, a few years later, we had The Flash in 2014, and now it's on the verge of entering its 6th season. Supergirl, which originally aired on CBS, would go on to air on the CW. Legends of Tomorrow would also premiere as well. Black Lightning, even though technically it's not really part of the Arrowverse, but another superhero-based show that's based off the DC comics. So really, and if the more you think about it, Arrow basically kind of changed the landscape of the CW, kind of going from more of like the female-driven network that's catered more towards soap operas into kind of like a more nerd culture crowd that basically the CW has been targeting. That's not to say that the CW has completely phased out some of those female-friendly shows. I mean, some of it's still apparent, but it's just not as dominant the way that it was like the first couple years of the CW. But yeah, I mean, I know I'm kind of rambling on and on about the CW, but this is really more about Arrow and just kind of like my thoughts on just the direction that the show's been taken. Throughout the course of those 7 seasons with Arrow, I mean, the first couple seasons we've had the infamous flashback scenes, where we get to kind of learn about Oliver in between the years that he'd been supposedly been dead, to the point where he would eventually find his way back home to Starling City, later known as Star City. So we kind of get to learn about some of the obstacles that he had to go through, some of the friends that he ends up establishing a bond with, and some friends that end up backstabbing him along the way. Once we kind of completed that journey throughout the first 5 seasons, we kind of transition over to the recent seasons where the flashbacks are used sporadically, and then most recently they've been kind of experimenting on utilizing scenes that take place within the future after Oliver's inevitable death. In some ways, you could really tell that the show is just kind of getting ready to end. And for those that have been following the show, especially with some of the crossover events, with Arrow, when the show got really popular, we also kind of got other spin-offs along the way. And I already discussed about some of those aforementioned shows, and having those annual team-ups to take place at the tail end of every year. So for those that watched Elseworlds, you might remember a scene where Oliver was in a conversation with the Monitor, and he made this kind of sort of deal. If you watch that scene alone, I won't spoil it completely, but there was some sort of conversation that kind of led to a point where Oliver was going to potentially give up his life. And after the end of Elseworlds, there was a little bit of a teaser, or not so much of a teaser, but kind of more of a text announcement that the following year's annual team up will be the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This would be kind of like sort of like an all-out warfare. And so there might be some potential speculation that Oliver will sacrifice his life, or that he would potentially die in some way. The instant when I found out about that announcement, that this could potentially mean the end of the entire Arrow series. It's just really hard to believe, seeing how long that this show's been running. I thought maybe for a while that the show would go into the next decade, like maybe going into, the 10th season, like maybe the show would go as long as Smallville did, even before the Elseworlds crossover, that, that maybe Barry would be the one that would either die or go missing, kind of like in that pilot episode, which kind of builds up into the Crisis on Infinite Earths that's supposed to supposedly take place in 2024. It's just really bizarre just even thinking about how long Arrow's been running. And I know some folks have their kind of mixed opinions on the show, especially in recent years. Like, it's become a soap opera. It's become too much about the power couple with Oliver and Felicity, and now that they have a baby, and then we find out that in the future that Felicity and Oliver would grow up to have a daughter named Mia. They're also gonna create a spin-off show that may potentially be in the works going into 8th season. I mean, I think that would be the appropriate time to kind of really tie up loose ends to a lot of the main plot points of the series. It'll be interesting to see how everything kind of comes into fruition, and what the 8th season will be, because as of the time I'm recording this video, it's already March of 2019. Not sure exactly what the plans will be once we get into the next season for Arrow, because now that they're kind of trimming down the episode count, because the first 6 seasons were like 23 episodes, and this season I believe is supposed to be like 18 episodes, and just recently that the 8th and what would turn out to be the eventual final season will now be reducing it to even more with 10 episodes. Hopefully they'll make the most out of this. I'm not sure how exactly that the final showdown will be, but it's likely that the Arrow series finale will be part of the annual team up crossover special that they'll do at the end of the year. Definitely gonna be a very interesting ride, I guess you could say. And there's definitely a lot of really good villains, if not great villains, that have appeared on the show throughout the years, going from Malcolm Merlin, aka the Dark Archer, to villains like Deathstroke, who ends up murdering Oliver's mother, and then they have kind of like this all-out battle that goes on within the glades and within the confines of Starling City. Even like Prometheus, I thought, with the Prometheus villain, I thought that was pretty cool, and there was actually a really cool fight scene that they had in the island, and kind of bring it full circle the more you think about it, given that the same island that Oliver had spent years and years believed to be dead, and just kind of going through all the turmoil that he had to endure throughout, the first few years that he was MIA. I thought that was actually really cool, and I thought Prometheus was a very, very intimidating villain. And I guess the same could apply with Deathstroke as well, since they were also some pretty interesting villains. I wish I could think of like a much bigger word for it. But he also had Constantine come back, because he also had his own series on NBC that got canceled way too soon. But then they managed to find a way to have the actor reprise his character, and you end up seeing him on like the spin-off series with Legends of Tomorrow, and then he would go on to become a regular cast member. So I thought that was actually really cool. I also really liked that episode with Constantine coming back in order to kind of revive Sarah after being killed off. And that would kind of like lay the groundwork for what would eventually be the starting point for the formation of the Legends. Laurel Lance. Oh man. I remember that was just one of the more like controversial decisions that they did, was like killing off Laurel as the Black Canary. It was all over Twitter, and people were just kind of like being enraged by the fact that they killed off an important figure. Her and Oliver Queen were supposed to get together, and then that just never really panned out, at least not in the TV adaptation. And then we got what we got with Felicity and Oliver, that were kind of dominating screen time. And I mean, granted, they would end up bringing her back, bring back Katie Cassidy, but having her not reprising the character, but basically portraying a different version of that character. Basically, if you watch The Flash, there's metahumans. They come from many different realms within the multiverse. They would eventually bring in the Black Siren, who ends up going to Star City, befriending the Team Arrow. Not really so much of a good guy or a bad guy, but kind of more like an anti-hero. It's definitely a far cry from the Earth 1 Laurel Lance, where she's kind of, going through a lot of emotions throughout the years, just losing a lot of loved ones, especially her boyfriend Tommy. And then she kind of had to go through some drug-related issues, especially alcohol. And then she had to go to therapy, and then she had to kind of redeem herself, eventually finding out Oliver's identity, which leads us into her slow transition to become the Black Canary for a while. I definitely really like this particular iteration of Katie Cassidy's portrayal of the Black Canary, Black Siren, how have you. Before I close out this video, it turns out I was actually rewatching the episode Brothers and Sisters. One interesting thing, I was like, oh my god, I did not know this about this until I started rewatching the episode again in my DVR, that towards the end of that episode, Adrian Paul actually made an appearance. Now, Adrian Paul, for those that don't know, he was an actor that was best known for his role as Duncan MacLeod in the TV version of Highlander throughout the early mid-90s. Yeah, so he actually appeared in that episode. It's towards the end, he got to kind of play a villain. It was really cool to see him on that show, and he hasn't really done a whole lot of acting, at least not a lot of notable ones. I did not discover it when I was watching it live, but it was really cool to see him in that episode. When it's all said and done, it will definitely be interesting how all the characters react once Oliver does the unthinkable, and once he eventually passes on into the afterlife. Whenever he passes away, it's how are all these characters going to react? And especially with someone like, with Dia, being that, her parents are dead, and just to have to imagine her older brother either sacrificing himself or either, end up getting killed and doing all that. It's like, how is she gonna, live through this? How are people like, Diggle and, obviously Felicity, because she's been Oliver's love interest for how long they've been together. How are all they gonna react? Barry, even though they're from different locations, how are Team Flash gonna react now that Oliver's gone? Oliver and Barry had this sort of mentor-student dynamic going on, and how Oliver was kind of like an inspiration to him. So there's just a lot of possibilities and how all those characters are going to react, and just as far as how everyone's kind of intertwined, how everyone's kind of, how Oliver's life has shaped the characters and all the friends and peers and people that he's worked with over the years. And so that's definitely going to be something that'll be interesting as how they'll tackle those issues. Granted, it's too soon to tell. We're getting closer to the end of the road. Arrow's definitely had a very good run, despite some ups and downs that have happened over the years. But that's kind of really all my thoughts are regarding about the announcement of Arrow's inevitable conclusion for next season. Just the culmination of how a playboy celebrity became the well-respected man that he would end up being. What are your guys' thoughts about the announcement? What were some of your favorite moments throughout the show's run? And let me know down the comment section below. I would definitely love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback for that matter. Thank you all guys for watching. Till next time, this is the GSTV Reviewer signing out.